is Tom Stebbins. I'm the county agent here in Hamilton County, and I see a lot of familiar names up there. I think we've got quite a few Hamilton County Master Gardeners. It goes out to our list, and it goes out to I think the Friends list too, which we've got close to 1,000 people on there. But anyway, today I'm going to be talking about fall chores or fall garden to-do list. And so that's kind of the way I put this together. I've done this several times to different groups. And so the fall gardener, there's a lot of things to do in the fall. A lot of things you can do. You can wait till spring, but I suggest thinking about the fall to do quite a few of these things. And there's the song. Every time I get to fall, I think about the turning of the leaves, the turning of the garden, getting it back to nature. And that was a song by Pete Seeger, 1959. I was a young lad back then, and I remember hearing that song. And during the Vietnam War, he was a big proponent. Some of you may have get that goosebump feeling when you hear that song. If you don't, that means you're quite younger. But it was a kind of a rally song for everybody, and actually a settling song, which I think is appropriate in this day and age too, just to slow down and to have a peaceful existence rather than this tension that we're feeling. And gardening really can do that. A lot of leaves out there. And here's the things I'm going to talk about today. There's things to think about when planting a tree. It's the perfect time to plant just about any tree, because that tree will have all winter long to get acclimated. Most people think, oh, I'll do it in the spring, but that way they get the tree in the ground and it turns hot by June, and then you have to water it, and even then you can't keep enough water on that tree. So right now is a great time to plant trees. It gives them a couple months to get established, dig in the dirt, get that ground turned over if you want to. Some things, I was thinking about that one. I was thinking that some of the vegetables or some of the plants are nice to see. Some of the ornamental grasses, for instance, are great to watch through the wintertime. I know I leave my asparagus ferns up, and they look just great during the wintertime, especially if we get a little dusting of snow. They just add some interest to the yard. So decide what you're going to do with digging in the dirt. We'll talk about that a little later. And then we'll talk about revitalizing the lawn. Again, fall is the time to do it. At least it's the best time, I think, of the whole year. People think spring, you get that spring fever and you want to get out there, but right now it's the best time to get your lawn in good shape. Cover that bare spot. Can't remember what that one was, but I'll get there. It's not my bald spot on my head, but it's probably something to do with gardening. Get rid of those weeds, stop those weeds. Right now is a good time to nip those certain types of weeds. We call them the winter annuals in the bud before they pop out of the ground. Then we talk about barring the door. Keep those pesky insects out of the house. Insects, of course, are cold body animals, and so they're trying to get inside when it's warm. And also we'll talk about some of them that maybe they come indoors at this time, and maybe they come in throughout the winter. Pruning is a good thing to do right now. Pruning trees because they have a little time to callus over. And of course, tulips, bulbs, and all kinds of things to plant right now are very good. Bringing in the green. When is the right time to bring in your plants? Putting them outside was a good choice. They were good to be outside, but there might be a time when to bring those ferns. We already started bringing some of ours in, and take care of a friend. We'll see what that one is too. Anyway, planting a tree. It's a great activity right now, especially when you're in the house, and there's lots of the nurseries are doing real well. They were able to social distance and people can go in there pretty safely, I think. I've been to some of the garden centers several times. Now's a good time to find that good tree and maybe dedicate it to this terrible year of 2020 and sort of a memory. So some of the things we should talk about when we're planting a tree that we don't always see, even from the best of what we think of our best city landscapers, county landscapers, sometimes they just don't do everything properly and we see the results. Here's sort of a diagram of what to think about. Every tree that you get, no matter large or small, has a trunk flare. You can see that down at the bottom there. It kind of flare, gets fatter down there. And you want to make sure you don't cover that when you plant the tree. Here it shows, maybe that shows a ball and burlap, but you can also get the potted plants now. Those are real popular. You can also buy bare rooted ones. The bare rooted ones will be just little, we call them whips. They're a little small, but you kind of can see a little flare on those too. When you see mature trees out in nature, you see that flare is well defined. And the reason you don't want to get anything over that is because during the spring and during the fall, there's a lot of water that accumulates right there. It's the water's being brought in as the leaves fall. The water's going back into the roots a little bit to prepare for winter. And if we get a hard freeze, that can crack that bark. The water, just like if you put a water, let's say a milk jug in their freezer, and you fill it full to the top, you put it in the freezer, and it could just crack it open because water expands quite a lot. And so if water is in that trunk, it can expand. And also if you cover it, it's a good place for fungi. If it stays wet, fungi can attack that area real easily and turn into crown, they call it crown rot. That's the crown of the, or you can call it trunk rot too. Anyway, you can see over there where we show a 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch, and you can see it stops just before it hits that flare. Never, never, never cover the trunk like you see around town. You'll see sometimes the trunk is covered up, is all the way up maybe a foot high, and that's a terrible, terrible practice to get into. So there's keep the mulch back from the trunk. There's if the tree is unstable, you can put on these ties to keep it from falling over in a wind, but I wouldn't do it right away. I would wait and just notice if it is pushing over from a wind. But generally, if you can get away with not using those staking things, more the better. You want the tree to flex in the wind a little bit. That way it'll get stronger. The trunk will respond to that flexing and just develop a stronger trunk. If you have to, go ahead, but be careful to do it in a really wide rubber tire, an old bicycle tire. Don't tie a knot around the trunk, because I've seen so many times when that happens that people forget the next year, or actually the tree grows pretty fast. If you tied it kind of tight right now, by the spring, that tree would be well into that rope. So you want to make sure. And if you're going to use ball and burlap, which is usually bigger trees, make sure you cut that ball or that rope and burlap away from at least the top third of the root ball. If you can get it around the whole, or away from the whole root ball, that's even better. I always use the analogy of Houdini. Remember that guy who they threw in the water with a straitjacket? And how could he get out of that straitjacket? Well, don't put your tree keep your tree in a straitjacket of all that burlap. Cut it away, make it much easier for the roots to expand, that because they're going to do it in the fall. You might as well let them get the best chance of reaching out into that soil. You can see how big they made that hole. They made it about 3 or 4 times the width of whatever they were planting, the ball or the pot. Notice you don't have to make it real deep either. I see that happening people get all enthused and they dig a real deep hole, and then they put fill dirt in there to bring it up to where they need to. And that's okay, but think about that fill dirt. It's going to settle. The tree has some weight, and if you might have to come back if you did that later on after a couple of rains, or if you water real good, you might notice that that tree sinks into the ground, and you definitely don't want to let that flare sink into the soil there. So do it right the first time. Just have it pretty firm on the bottom, but then have real loose soil around the edges. Because remember, if you haven't ever heard one of my tree talks, the roots go out like a pizza pan. They don't go down into the ground very much. Even a mature tree is only 2 or 3 deep. Maybe it gets down to 4 feet. But you see these huge trees that are probably over 100 years old. When they fall over, they don't have that deep of a root system. So are you going to get more plants this year? There's always room for one more, right? That's usually the case around our house too. But usually you should try to have an idea where that's going to go. I only have so much space, and when I see a plant that I like or hear about it, the first thing you should know is it going to go in the shade, or is it going to be one of those that would do better in the sun? So right now I have room for both, but I'm real picky about the plants I choose. It's an excellent time to look around and see what trees, if you got room for a tree, to plant a tree. Make sure you check it out, make sure the size will fit in your area. If you love the color, make sure you can pick one that's going to have good fall color and maybe good spring blooms. That's why a lot of people pick dogwood or Coosa dogwood or any range of native trees. They don't have to be native. They could be lots of great hybrid trees that we've got in the garden center right now. Many trees are hybridized just so they can have the better color. For instance, the Armstrong maples, some of them are red and some of them are orange. So if you're picking a tree for fall color, it's a good time to go to the garden center and see some of those trees already in color. The leaves are falling fast, so you need to get there pretty quick. Or maybe you just want something that's the leaves will be gone, but the structure of the tree will be great. I've got some trees that are losing their leaves right now, but they're actually in flower. Camellia is a great example. Gosh, camellia is going to be green pretty much during the winter, and it's flowering like crazy. So if you want to fill in some gaps in your landscape with flowering things that flower in the fall, we know we have abundance of things that flower in the spring, but it's hard to find something that flowers in the fall and the winter. Witch hazel comes to mind. It's not a real showstopper, you might say, but it's a very cool tree that flowers in the winter. So does camellia. A lot of camellias that you can get. Some will flower now in the late fall. Some will flower pretty much in the late winter, early spring. So that's a good one to pick. And there's a few others. There's one that I got just recently or a couple years ago that's doing great. Edgeworthia. It's a tiny, small little tree. It only gets about 4 feet high. And right now it's losing its leaves, but the blossoms or the buds, you can see the little white buds just popping out of that tree. And that's a really cool tree, Edgeworthia. So digging in the dirt, now is a good time you can take a soil test. It's good to analyze your soil. Here's a guy that got carried away with his garden right here. Dug a little too deep there, but if you could dig a hole, it'd be nice to see just what the layers are in your soil. We just had the master gardener, the intern class, talk about soil, and I said that to them that they could go to the Soil Conservation Service, which is located at our ag center on Bonnie Oaks, and you could go. I don't know if there's probably one in Bradley too, but I think every county might have some kind of thing like that. But you can go there. I think there's online places you can look up your your soil for your area. If you have a little bigger area like that's been basically undisturbed, then that'll be pretty valid information. If you're in a subdivision, you might have to take it with a grain of salt or grain of dirt, in that you'll get a map back of the soil of that particular place. And it's pretty close. It's probably not to your exact lot, but it'll tell you what kind of soil. It might tell you if it's sandy or clay or silty. Might give you some idea of how well it did for farming. And depends on how much backfill you've got on your house will determine what the soil is. But even if you did, even if they filled in with, and they usually don't fill in with that much topsoil, you may find that you've got a really nice soil underneath it, which you can dig down and turn it over and get it up to the surface maybe, and use what you have. You may not have to bring in extra soil to improve your soil. So anyway, work with, I told them in the class last night and Monday, or yesterday during the day and Monday night. My days are running together. But anyway, I told them to work with what you have instead of trying to transform your whole yard. You just can't do that. But if you work with what you have, you can do lots of things. Here's a way to sample that soil. If you're lucky, or if you just want to make it a good investment, that probe right there, I like one that's a little bigger. That one there is about 2 feet. I like one that's maybe about a yard, maybe it's almost 4 feet, and it has a little step peg on it, which you can stand up and you can push it right into the ground. At this time of year, when we've had all this moisture, you could probably push it all the way down there, which is almost over a foot, maybe a foot and a half. And that's a good thing, even though you might not use that whole soil, not for the soil test. It's good to know how deep your clay is. When I do it at the Ag Center for demonstration for master gardeners, I'll push it down in the spring and I'll bottom out. I'll bottom out into the clay because it gets pretty hard down there. And I might even hit a rock. That way I know that how far my topsoil, my subsoil, basically the soil that the plants are going to go down into. I know that's how far I can go. If I only can go, I bet on Signal Mountain, there's places, or if you're in a rocky area, you may only go down 4 inches, and then bang, you're hitting into a rock. Then you know you have to really work with that topsoil. But the sampling, generally the sampling depth is 6 inches for most things. I think they put that down because it's about right for everything. But I try to refine that a little bit. I say, let's say you push that probe down into the ground and you pull up, I would throw out the top little bit, the top inch. And the reason I do that is because you don't know what's going on the top. A flock of birds could have landed right on the top of your grass, and they sat there, and lots of manure ended up right there. So I throw out that inch. I go down, if I'm doing turf, I go down to about 2 to 3 inches and take a lot of the soil in that depth. I don't take, if I can push the probe way down to 6 inches, I really don't want that soil because that's not where the grass is going to be growing anyway. So I can refine this a little bit. If I'm growing shrubs or thinking about trees, I might take the soil at more of a depth of 2 to 6 inches. Again, throw away that top inch or so. So, and you take a random sampling of whatever you're taking. I think the next, you take 10 samples. I don't know if I've ever taken 10, but that's kind of the rule, to go around your yard. Pick out if you're going to do it in the front yard or the backyard. Sometimes if you've got a flat property, the front and the back, you can take 5 in the back and 5 in the front. But if you've got a yard like mine that's so different in the back and quite different in the front, then I would suggest taking 2 samples. It's going to cost you twice as much, but you can still, yeah, you can still do it. And use a spade. If you don't have that tube, you can use just a pointed shovel, and that works good. You just basically, when you do that, you break off. You see that picture right there. When you push it into the soil, you just take the core down the center. So you take a slice. There's some diagrams there that kind of show how to do it. The gentleman up there in the picture wants you to just go around different places in your yard. If you end up, or if you, let's say you have a vegetable garden and you wouldn't throw that sample in with your turf. You'd want to do some different sampling. But there is one thing that you can, if you're a brand new homeowner and your yard really hasn't been gardened very much, you can take samples from different parts of your yard. Let's say you've got a regular size yard. You can take just one sample from your whole yard. When you fill out the form, here's the box you use. The form is the next one, but I'll show you here. The box that you use is just like somebody said, a sushi box or a little ice cream box. And that's all the soil you need, but make sure you fill it up. When you back here, when you did those 10 samples, see that pail or that bucket, put all 10 in that one bucket, and then just use a screwdriver or a smaller trowel, break it all up really good so that you've got one sample to put in that box. See the nice clean bucket they had back there? And make sure that wasn't one that you just got done mopping the floors with, because there'd be a lot of phosphate in that. There might be a lot of chemicals that display your test. So you want to make sure that you mix it all up, all 10 samples in that one, and just take out what you need for the box. You should, if you can, dry it out. If it's really kind of wet, put it on a nice brown paper or something. I guess you could use newsprint, but sometimes that would bring that newsprint off. But anyway, they'll dry it at the lab anyway. But you could help them out a little bit by drying it out. You could probably make it less heavy by drying it out too, because you're going to mail this up to Nashville to get a soil test. That's where they do all the soil tests for Tennessee. If you're in Georgia, send it to the Georgia one, and I'll tell you why in a second. Here's the kind of the form you're going to get back. Some of the forms have changed, I think, since this was done, but basically you're going to get a pH right there where it's got color. You're going to get a water pH, and that's going to be the pH of your soil. If you don't know what pH is, it's the acidity. It's how acid your soil is. And how acid determines the uptake of so many of your elements, all the nitrogen. Sometimes when it's real acid, the nitrogen isn't taken up. Or if it's real basic, sometimes that pushes it up or makes some elements not taken up by plants very well. And then when you come across there, you'll see the phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, zinc, copper. As we get through there, some are what we call the macro elements, and some are the micro elements, and you need some of both. You definitely need the macros, and they'll give you a little letter next to it. They'll say a V, which is very high, or let's see, what is V? H is high. V might be I'll have to see. They've got a key down below. There it is. V are very high. I guess V is very high. So they switch that up sometimes. If it was D, it'd be deficient. S is sufficient. Usually they'll tell you your minor or your micro elements. They'll just say if they're sufficient or not sufficient. So every Tennessee's form would be a little different than Georgia's, and Tennessee will do your test according to Tennessee conditions. And by that, what I mean is that over the years, over the time, they've mapped out Tennessee and different areas, just because they could, like I told you, you could go to the soil district and find the soil for your area. And so they know how the tests are going to run basically. And the things that they do, they have to use different processes to figure out how to determine all these elements in your soil. So the ones for Georgia may be different than the ones in Tennessee. They might be quite a bit different if you're doing it out west in Oregon or Washington State, Utah, things like that. So you want to do it. You want to do it with it might be cheaper in another state, but don't do that. Just $15 is a bargain for what you're getting here, and you're getting more. I think your bang for your buck from the pH. That's something you could do with a cheap test that you get from they sell these kits, and have fun with that. You know, learn about pH. You can teach kids about acid soils and acid foods and things like that. But when it comes to wanting to know a little bit more about your soil, I wouldn't skimp. You know, $15 is good. I wouldn't go overboard. I wouldn't. Some people come in with 20 samples, and I ask them, why do you need 20 samples? And they said, well, I need one here and here and here. And I can probably tell them not to use as many as just a couple, 2 at the most. Front yard, backyard, front yard, vegetable garden, things like that. If you're a brand new person, I think I was either didn't say it or was getting ready to say it. If you're a brand new homeowner, you can actually put down four different things. There's codes that you can use. I don't think I have it on this PowerPoint, but there's codes that you could use. You could get 4 samples. You could ask of the same soil, 1 sample. You could ask for your lawn, your flower garden, your trees, and whatever else, fruit. But that would only be if you were starting from a blank slate. If you've gardened for quite a bit, you can't do that too well. Then you'll get a recommendation. It might tell you need lime. If they told you needed lime, that meant your soil was real acid. If they told you needed sulfur, that would mean your soil was on the other end, way up higher in the 8 range or the 9 range. And if they didn't say anything, sometimes they said here, lime is not recommended, because everybody wants to know that. And they give other instructions too. So we say test every 3 years if it's a lawn, or every year in a vegetable garden. I think that might be a little much too. If you've had a good garden, I would wait 3 years. If you had problems in your garden, I would do it every year. If you're having problems in your lawn and you send in samples and they tell you to add some lime or do some things, then I would do it again the next year to see if your amendments were doing what you thought. Revitalize the lawn. This is a time of year to get out there and actually do some fertilizing. This is the better time to fertilize than it would be in the spring. And the reason is because you're actually fertilizing the roots in the fall. And at this time, you could also look for weeds. You can use a drop spreader like that. I think those are the drop spreader, the one you push behind, is a little bit better than the one that you turn that crank and it spits out. There's a fertilizer. If you go to the store, you'll see nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, potash. If you didn't notice, but we couldn't measure, or the soil lab didn't measure nitrogen for us, because nitrogen is very soluble, and it's hard to measure it at any given time. But every year you're going to need some. Every fall, in this case, you'll need some for your grass. With turf anyway, you have a choice of putting fertilizer on several times. You can do it in the spring. I prefer to do it in the fall because it has more time to work, and it can enrich the leaves, or enrich the roots and the leaves a little bit. If you do it in the fall and the spring, that means you're a high maintenance lawn person, and that means you're trying to get every last green out of the plant. But sometimes if you do it in the spring, especially a spring only, then you can have a too lush of a lawn. And if you have too lush going into early spring, sometimes that can lead to disease. And here's a lawn that they didn't apply it very well. This is a spring application. They should have figured out how much they needed, and then go both ways with your drop spreader. So you have to figure out half of what you need, which is sometimes kind of hard. I've done these things before, and I get halfway done, and it's already got all the fertilizer that they told me I needed. So I have to go back to the store. And if you do over fertilize, try to figure out what you did wrong and try to recalibrate so you can do it better the next time. Cover that bare spot. This is what we were talking about. If you do have just a few spots like this in your lawn, then you might not have to do everything, especially with dead spots like that. You might fertilize the whole lawn, but then these dead spots, you may have to actually rake those and take a rake and scratch them up, and maybe even use some extra seed. Fall is a good time, and you still have some time to reseed your lawn if the whole lawn looks pretty bad. I would suggest if you're going to do your lawn, I would suggest core aerating right now, which means you'd have to rent one of these things that pops these holes out of the ground. Sometimes that's best left to a younger professional, and they can actually seed right after that because you're making those little holes. And that's a great time, because a lot of us will just go out there thinking we can throw seed on the whole lawn. You can do that with these smaller areas because you're going to rake and get little holes, little channels in there. But if you just do it to the whole lawn and throw the grass seed out there, you won't have a very good chance of success, because the seed needs to get into the ground to do a good job. Now is a good time to do fescue. It's not a good time to do Bermuda or zoysia. You've got those two. Those are warm season lawns, and they need to be done in the spring or late spring. So here's the Kentucky. Don't write down Kentucky 31 because that's an old one. That's why we got it on here. Don't use that one. Use the more expensive grass seed, which has a bunch of different grass seeds. This one just has Kentucky 31. What you want are the ones that have a blend. So if you go to Holcomb's, I used to say Holcomb's, but if you go to the barn, if you go to, if you can go to Home Depot and Lowe's too, and look for their top quality seed. And that's the one that probably is going to be selected for this area for one. That's why if you go to a local nursery, you'll probably get seed that's selected for our southeastern Tennessee, and it'll probably do much better. And it'll have 5 different fescues in the blend, which will be, maybe some will be good for drought, some will be good for color, but when you mix them all together, you'll get the benefits of that. So here's the preferred seeding date. We're just at the end. Sometimes I've seen people get away with seeding in December, but it all depends on what kind of weather we'll have. If you think you really need to do it, I would give it a go now versus wait until spring. If you're going to do it in spring, do it in really early spring, March, April. Don't wait till May, June to seed. Covering it, I see if you're going to put on some seed, don't put a lot of straw mulch on, just enough. You want to be able to, if you put your fingers over your eyes like this, let's say, and that's how much straw you should put on. You should be able to see the ground underneath the straw. Some people will think, and I probably did when I was earlier, I'd put so much straw in there that the sun or the moisture couldn't get to it, the air. If you just put on a nice light covering, all you're trying to do is keeping it from drying out too quickly. And then once that grass seed grows, it takes about 10 or 12 days when it's cooler like this. But once the fescue starts, then you're in good shape for the winter. It loves this cold weather. And we're getting some nice cool nights and warmer days. So after it comes up, you want to water, fertilize, mow, and pest control. A lot of things. We could do several talks, and the interns will get their turf talk next week. So get your Bermuda or zoysia lawns ready for winter. Just make sure the cutting is make sure your cutting height is a little higher now. And apply fertilizer with potassium, can also increase hardiness. Stop the weeds. Now's a good time to put on some of these weeds that are in your lawn, basically, or in your garden. I think we're talking mostly about lawn weeds right now, are going to be what we call winter annuals. That means they grew all summer, they set their seed, and they probably even started their little seedlings. And if you don't do anything right now, they're going to grow during the winter time, and they're going to pop up in the spring, and you'll have to deal with them in the spring. So what do? You have to, blooms in the spring, but you want to control this in the fall. This is one of the nasty ones. One thing I would suggest is first identifying. Get some of these neat apps that we have that you can put on your phone, either iNaturalist or Google Lens. Take a picture of the weed or send it into the Ag Center, to our hotline, identify it, and then go from there. Then you can look it up and see when the best time is for control and what to use for control. Garlic is always a tough one. I always have to think about how should I do this garlic? Treat November and March. Yeah, and this one you probably have to hit it twice. And the thing about these is the chemicals that you use often roll right off of it because it's such a slick and shiny weed. I always have to look up what exactly chemical, but I always try to pick a chemical that's going to hopefully stick to the leaves and get better control. Then let's move on to these pesky little ladybugs and other things. These aren't your ladybugs that if you're older than, let's say, 40, 50, then in the old days we had a nice orangish ladybug, but I think maybe for the last 50 or so years we've had these multicolored Asian lady beetles, and they were brought in basically to take care of a lot of pests in our fruit crops. You can see all the little aphids there down at the bottom, that they're just loving it like candy. So they're good insects. So I don't, but you just don't want them in your house, right? So that's the thing, to keep those out. Here's a couple other things. Just in the last 10 years or so, we're got these stink bugs. And then every time it gets cold and then it gets warm again, we see this box elder bug. There's another one that looks very similar called the red shoulder bug. So people say, what can we spray to kill these things? And I tell them, don't spray. You've got to get rid of this in your doorway or your windows, because they can crawl in very easily around those openings. So you want to do, right now is a good time to do your weatherizing. So you might hire a carpenter rather than a pest control person, because a carpenter can seal those places and put those weather stripping, and that'll be so much better than pesticides. Pruning is a good thing to do right now if you've got a limb that's in the way, or if you just want to shape up a tree, but do it right. You see the tree, I'll use my pointer here. See where the red cut is. The reason they cut out there is because you see right in here, there's a collar. There's a little fat part, and that's what it's called, a collar. Every branch has that. You don't want to cut into that, because that's where the healing takes place. That's where the callus tissue is ready to form. Once you cut, you don't want to, if this is a living branch, you don't want to cut way out here either. You don't want to leave a stub, because what will happen is bad fungi or the pathogenic fungi will get in that stub and go right into the tree. That'll give an avenue. So if you cut that limb right there, it'll make it easy for the tree to quickly grow over it. I wish I had some pictures. Maybe I do. No. And if it's a bigger limb, you want to cut it in three different cuts. You want to do the first cut underneath, and then the second cut, you want to get rid of the bigger branch way out here and leave a stub, because then when you do that final cut on that stub, it won't just slip and fall, or in other words, slip and rip the bark off that tree. How many times have I cut it right here first, and I'm cutting right here, and I get to that point right there, and all of a sudden the tree limb is heavy, it goes down here, and I've got a big rip right through there. So don't do it that way. Do it the way we talk here, 2 different cuts. Now's a good time to plant tulips and great things like that. Now's a good time to go to the store and look for deals. Look for those packs of 50 daffodils, or packs of, good flowers. You could buy them online and get different types. There's so many different types of bulbs that you can use. Crocus. I just love to plant something every year, so that every spring I'll see some of these. Daffodils do the best ever in Tennessee, and you can't go wrong. And there's probably, there's probably at least 100 different cultivars of daffodils. So if you pay attention to when they emerge, you might see early, middle, and late daffodils. I don't know about hyacinths. I suppose every one of these has their early, middle, and late cultivars to look for. So if you want a longer season, look for that. Look for size, look for color, all those different things. When you're planting bulbs, the rule of thumb is to go 1.5 times the fatness of the bulb. That's what we normally use. I think you'd be in good shape if you planted them about the size of the width. You want to bury them deep enough to where animals won't find them real easy, and you want to make them so they'll get a good attachment with the only one that I know of that you don't want to do that are iris roots. You wouldn't call those bulbs, you'd call those iris roots. Iris roots, you basically want to lay on the top of the ground and then throw just a little soil, maybe a ½ inch of soil on top of iris. And we've got a bunch of iris. I've got a bunch of iris to give away for interns. I forgot all about them. If some of the interns remind me, I'll give those out some way. So now's a good time to bring in plants that you had outdoors. Find a place for them. If you can find a place where you can keep them in a moderately sun, you don't want to bring them in and put them in a real hot window. We bring our ferns in and leave them more or less on the north side or the east side. A south-facing window can burn these things. So be real careful. Also, when you're bringing in these things, check them out. It might be a good time to spray maybe a horticultural soap or some kind of a insect spray outside. Leave them there for a couple of days and then bring them in, instead of having to deal with scale and mealybugs and all that other stuff when they're inside. Yeah, mealybugs are a tough one. Those other scale and all these things, yeah, you have to deal with it, but you can usually do pretty good with just a mild detergent and a gallon of water. Especially if you're just dealing with a few plants, you can get in there with a Q-tip of alcohol and touch on these things and kind of wipe them off with a rag, and you can clean them up. I think the benefits of putting things out on the porch and on the deck really make a difference on my house plants. So I like to do it, but I just want to be careful I don't leave them out there too long. We're getting to the point of some of these things are a little bit too cool out there. And tools, taking care of tools. It's a good time of year to think about bringing in your tools. I'm terrible with this. I'll leave tools out, but it is a good time to wash them off at least, and take a little sandpaper to shine them up, make sure they're out of the weather. Now's a good time to add mulch for spring planting. You could probably find good prices on mulch too, because there was a lot of, unfortunately, all the tornadoes that occurred here. I'm pushing wood chips. Everyone knows that in all the talks I've given lately. I think wood chips, if you can find a good source, tell everybody where you're getting them if you can find them. I know one of our master gardeners told me that one of our landscapers has an abundance that they can bring. So spread the word around. I think there's places where you can get wood chips for a good price. And wood chips are a little better because they come from the middle of the tree, and that's where all the xylem and the phloem and all the elements are going up and down trees and shrubs. Whereas the bark that you usually buy for $10 a bag are made of mostly the outer edge, which doesn't have those tubes. So you're getting a little bit more nutrients. You might even get some grass thrown in there. Hopefully it's just turf grass, and that'll add to a little bit of nitrogen that you could have. So you want to also, let's see, what does it say here? You want to get rid of the larger stuff in your garden. I always get rid of my tomato vines, although some of mine are still producing. Start trimming those up, getting rid of those, kind of disturbing the soil a little bit. If you've got raised beds, now may be a time to get that bigger stuff out of there and lay down just a cover of heavy black plastic if you can. That way it might snuff out any of the weeds that grow up in the spring, all those winter weeds we talked about. But you can till it if you want to. There's no sin in that. There's different ways to put your garden to bed. Some of the soft herbaceous plants, bee balm, hostas, and things, they die back on their own. And so after they do die back, it's a good time to cut off the dead top growth. Anything that's dead is anything that falls over and Mother Nature tells you, hey, this isn't going to come back this year. Some of these other things like goldenrod, black-eyed Susans, daisies, don't cut those way back. Cut them about 2 or 3 inches of stem to keep them, because they're gonna shoot out stems from that lower 2 inches. But it's nice to get them cleaned out. So some of the things to cut back in the fall. There's a bigger list than this. And some of you on here might know better how to take care of your plants. I know bee balm, flax, lilies, hostas. Woody ornamentals should not be cut back until spring. I think you can at least kind of thin them out or get out the dead parts, but I'd wait a little bit until spring. That includes the lavender, which I usually let go and just take out the dead parts. Rosemary survives the winter pretty good, and all these other ones. If you've got roses, here's the technique on roses. Right now is a good time to get rid of most of the tops and where it's been growing. You see a lot of cuts have been made, the autumn cuts, but don't do everything. Wait until spring to actually come in and do the final cuts to where you cut it back to 6 to 12 inches. That way you can see the plant better. You can see which stems are growing out. You always want to try to make your stems grow away from the plant so they don't crisscross. And there's a whole talk that could be gotten on roses, but basically that's what to do with your roses. And if you do have herbs out there, or I do, I've got several of them. This is a technique that would be pretty neat to use. Use some ice cube trays and chop them up. There may be other ways to do this too. I think people just chop them up and put them in little baggies and put them in your freezer that way, dry. That way you can pull them out and drop them into stews and different things, dishes in the wintertime. It's a way to do that. If they have any of these to share, put them in some baggies and bring them to the Ag Center, and we'll give them out as door prizes for whoever other classes that we do. So anyway, sometimes this is a good time of year to do certain things. You can buy manure, you can buy it bagged. Just call it by the right name, especially when you're giving a talk. And I think that's our talk for the day. I appreciate everyone coming, and we'll stop the sharing so I can see everybody, and we'll entertain any questions. And if anybody, as usual, if I can't answer a question, someone else can chime in. I know Angelon and anybody else who might be on here can chime in and help answer any questions.
I have a question, Tom. This is Dawn.
Yeah.
I am wanting to plant some blueberry bushes this fall, and I'm not sure what I need to do to the ground. I know they need an acidic environment, but I am in a new build home, so this would be the first thing planted there. So
it's good to get that soil test first, because if you don't, then you gotta try to, and generally, unless you're lucky that you have acid soils, you'll have to go in there and remediate while you have the plant there, which is difficult, because if let's say your pH is 7, and you know that you need, like, let's say 5 for blueberries, somewhere between 5 and 6. Well, that isn't just 2 points of acidity. Every unit, if you go from 7 to 6, that's 10. If you go to 7 to 5, that's 100 times more acid. So if you put on everything that the soil test recommends, if you've got to put that much, let's say, sulfur on there, you could injure your plants. So what then you have to do is do it in gradual cases. So I would give up on the blueberries. I hate to say it. You can try it. I mean, I've done that. But then you pay the price later. You say, why didn't they grow real well? It's because your ground was not the right pH.
how late could I plant blueberries?
Well, you can do it in the winter. You can do it in an open winter that we have.
So just wait till I get it back.
Yeah. The thing about it, though, is that it isn't an instantaneous change of pH. So if you do everything, if you get the soil test back, let's say this week or next week, and you apply what you need to do, or if you're lucky, you've got it, it'll work. I wouldn't be afraid to plant them if your pH was, let's say 6. You don't have to have everything perfect for any plant. There's just some things we know that azaleas do better, blueberries do better. If I was planting 20 acres of blueberries, I would definitely want to have a nice acid soil. It's hard to change anybody's soil too. People who plant those kind of things, sometimes they dig up the ground and put new, more acidic soil in that area. It's really hard to just say, I want blueberries and I'm just going to change my soil. It's not that easy.
I already have azaleas that are doing really well in that same area that
There you
the
go.
builder put in.
Yep.
So I think it's actually going to be pretty decent soil.
And there's no shame in giving it the old gardening go.
Okay.
Just try it and see.
I'll try it and let you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm getting ready to plant some garlic for next year. And there's a lot of squirrels around my area here. Do I have to worry about them trying to dig that up?
Garlic?
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, you always have to worry about squirrels digging something up.
Right. I just didn't know if they cared for garlic or not.
Yeah, they probably are more inquisitive about a disturbed soil. So if you had some kind of a cover, you could get
I was thinking about doing a little cage with some like chicken wire.
Yeah, an old screen just to lay over the top, just to keep them out of there for a year at least. But the new ones could be damaged pretty quickly if you didn't.
Where do I get the box for to send in a soil sample?
I didn't say, but you get it by going to the Ag Center right now and calling the number. When you get there, there's going to be a number on the door, and you call and say, hey, I want a soil box. And then they bring one down with the instructions and pass it through the door, and you're on your way. That's
okay, great.
You're in Tennessee?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the way to do it right now. We don't have any real other slick way to do it. So thanks everybody for tuning in today.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. It was great.
Thanks for your help.